We are already
We
live.
are already live, so it's very exciting.
If anyone goes to the Citizens Voice Facebook page, you'll see the link for the live stream. If you could tweet that out to anyone, Facebook it out to anyone.
Yeah.
And later on in the program, we'll be taking questions, and there's some sticky notes that are distributed throughout the room. And so just fill out the question, put your question on the sticky note, and I'll come and collect them. So we can do that. And just to give people an overview of what we're going to be doing, we're just going to be hearing from Joe about the history of CCEN, where it's coming from, and going through the different work streams and what we've been up to with Espace Paris, and how we're going to transition. Joe.
Yay, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gwen. Hi, everybody. So, welcome. This is the official launch of the Citizens Climate Engagement Network. We first presented the governance strategy for this new global institution on October 25th in Minneapolis at the end of a day of dialogues. But I want to tell you a little bit about how this actually got started. So, in Citizens Climate Lobby, what we do is we sit down with lawmakers and we spend time listening to them. We help them build relationships with the people they've sworn an oath to serve, and try to make the conversation about what the best policy is something that comes from a human place, from what I value, what you value, what the person in a position to make a decision values. And then from there, from that understanding and that human connection, actually build a smarter way of thinking about policy together. In the international policy environment, it's very difficult to create that kind of connection between citizens and the people making decisions, because big UN conferences have almost 200 countries in them. It's difficult to be accredited to attend, even as an organization, and even then, only the leaders really get to go. So most people never get the opportunity to just walk in and attend and see what's going on. You have to do it remotely. You have to be part of a kind of listening network. So what we decided to do was create the Pathway to Paris project, thinking about the Paris Climate Conference when the world had decided several years ago we were going to decide the world's climate future. And think about how do we open up this global space. And so the idea was create a convening space, create something that's more like a representative government where you can walk into the halls where decisions are made and play a role. And so, in fact, what ends up happening is instead of walking into a space where other people decide, we created a space where citizens actually are the leaders, where citizens actually get to work together and create a different kind of thinking about policy. So that's the Pathway to Paris project. It has a lot of different moving parts, a lot of different elements to it. And the goal was to bring that kind of person-to-person interrelationship into the global negotiating process. The main outcome of that is this, the Citizens Climate Engagement Network. And so what this is the result of a year of working sessions, learning about how you get people in a room together to have conversations about shared values and then translate that on the fly into real, constructive, locally sourced policy advice. And then leave in place, wherever possible, a new network of collaborators. They don't have to be only from Citizens Climate Lobby, only from the local organizations. They can start a new organization, they can be an informal network that springs up on that day. They can do a lot of different things to keep the momentum going and then to go deeper and become local leaders in their communities. So we're taking that toolkit and we're introducing it to the world as something where we can actually have people everywhere hosting these meetings, building this network, participating in a global conversation. So I don't want to go on too long about all of this, the history. We'll talk a little bit more about the structure of things later on, but I do want to take a minute to just recognize the team of people who have helped get us here. A lot of you are actually here in the room, a kind of core team of people who not only are here in Paris, but have been working on this for a while. So could everybody who's part of the Pathway to Paris team stand up? Could someone pan around the room and show them to the people watching online? Incidentally, some people are not standing. So they're busy doing things on their laptop. what's important about this is that this is effectively a big team meeting that's open. People can come in who are from outside the team, but we're going to formally, essentially, adopt this new governance strategy and begin work as the Citizens Climate Engagement Network today. So I want to thank everybody who's part of this, and now start having a conversation about some of the elements of what we've been doing. But before we do that, we're going to talk specifically about the Citizens Voice team in a minute. But I just want to hear from maybe 2 or 3 of you who are part of our team, what you think is sort of the motivation for doing this, what your preferred aims are, what you're getting out of it, what you think we're accomplishing. Who wants to say something? Paul?
So, for me, I've been to many of these
Who are you?
comps. I'm Paul Thompson. I'll stand up. And I'm from Minnesota. And I've been to many COP conferences in the past and always left feeling empty, like I didn't know that I really made a difference. I saw a lot of people. I learned a lot myself. And what Citizen Voice and Pathway to Paris and CCL has given me is a platform for really, truly making a difference and communicating to my friends and network back home, what exactly do I do? And that really makes a big difference for me. And I realized in sharing this out with the work of Citizen Voice, the impact I'm having on my friends and family back home, there's going to be a different reception when I go back. And I know that we're going to be filling up spaces because I'm requesting in a strong language that all of us need to step to this next level. I woke up in the morning, this morning, and I just thought, here's another morning to take the next step of moving outside my comfort zone. And I invited a ton of people to this event. And I know I was laying seeds and groundwork. And I don't see many of them in the room, but that doesn't matter. You know, they know that something's going on with the work that we're doing. So I just appreciate being able to play in this environment that you are creating, that we're all creating.
Thank you, Paul. That we're creating together. And actually, I want to say something about what you just said. There's this, we had the conversation in our apartment this morning that there's a kind of pull towards the negotiating venue. It's sort of like the one ring to rule them all. Everybody is so attracted by it and has this kind of strange, glitter in their gaze about, I've got to be there. But the thing is that not everybody who just gets inside the venue is going to actually be able to do something. I think that's what Paul is saying, is that there's so much complexity that it can really push you off your game. It can really push you off track in terms of what your talents are, what you're trying to accomplish. And so part of what we're doing in this room is we're trying to expand the space for people to actually walk into and do something that's more than attend, that's more than talk. It's actually to build relationships that last over time and that give them a way to be leaders in this whole environment. You can actually lead from outside that venue and influence what goes on inside the venue. But it's harder to do it when you get that glitter in your gaze and you can't really see clearly. You're just being pulled towards the eye, and it doesn't give you back what you think it's supposed to, right? So I think that's a gap we're all trying to fill in, that empowerment gap. Anyone else? Did Paul just say it all?
This is the shy part.
This is the shy part. People are sure they want to tell their story. Peter?
Well, I actually love doing it because I love supporting you. And I mean, you're a great guy, but it's a team that gets a lot done. And it's like Paul said, there aren't many things you can do in the climate that actually make a difference.
Yeah.
And so supporting the team to make a difference lights me up.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's also, when I just had this conversation a minute ago with Claire, somebody comes to me and says, is this happening, is that happening, we had this thought. And I say, that's great, is someone doing that? Oh yeah, it's done. This is a very effective group of people, right? There are things that have already happened that I didn't even know we were doing. And I think that's what this is about, is local genius. Not just local ideas, local insights, local action, local genius. The fact that there's something inherent in being in a place, connecting with people, knowing your life, that you can actually be relevant. Someone just has to say, go and do that. Anyone else? One more?
My name is Lee Balance. I'm from Berkeley, California. I'm a CCL member. And I found working with my fellow, my community and with political leaders as a citizen to be incredibly rewarding and effective. And I think that if this can be rolled out to other countries so that citizens can find a way to engage with leadership and build relationships, this can be an incredibly profitable and helpful thing.
Excellent. So we're going to have to move on because we have a very tight schedule. We have a couple more people who want to say things, but you're both actually on the agenda. So take a minute during your time to say what this means to you. I'm going to introduce Claire Richet, who's sort of one of the leaders of our Citizens Voice team, to talk a little bit about what Citizens Voice is and why it's part of this whole process.
And Paul and Naomi want to come with me? So Citizens Voice came out of an initiative, part of the Paris de Paris program that Joe had created, trying to do a 24/7 news stream of citizens' voices about climate change during COP21. And so Citizens Voice the goal is to put together all the citizens' voices about climate change during COP21 onto one YouTube channel. And so we have this awesome group of volunteers that have really, not many people have media backgrounds. We're coming together and just really attacking this project together, and it's been a ton of fun. And it's a really great way for people to, as Paul was saying earlier, to plug into the negotiation process and talk with the people back home and engage people back home with what they're doing about it. And so that's one really awesome thing. So we have reporters of our own going out and taking coverage of different events and things like that. And then we also have contributing content from people like Context News and Climate Countdown and other sources that we're highlighting on our YouTube channel, and then on social media, like Facebook and Twitter. And so just to talk about one of our own shows that we're doing with Coffee, Naomi's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So the story that I can tell that this morning we had a conversation with 4 people from Suriname. And when I went up to this woman yesterday, I felt like a normal person going up to her booth and saying, tell me your story, tell me about indigenous people in Suriname. But then when Bruce and I took out a video camera and said that we would put this on YouTube for her, I felt like our relationship changed. She knew that we were there as the beginning of the Citizens Climate Engagement Network to give something back, to create a relationship where we were going to say to the world, this is important. So I think that Cup of Coffee can be a really powerful tool for creating a relationship and engaging these people in a more meaningful way.
And yeah, so many stories about people impacting me and we impacting people. Before coming, we went to a gathering at the Minnesota at the it wasn't the State Department, it was a gathering at the Science Museum. The Lieutenant Governor was there, commissioners were there. There are like 80 people from Minnesota that are at this conference. And we started interviewing people from Macalester College. And now we met with them yesterday. They came to Cup of Coffee. Today they're saying, I need a higher resolution picture to send to Macalester College because they want to publish this. And it can go on and on and on, but working with Mindy, we've interviewed maybe 10 people, and now we're getting back to them using their network and getting the word out. So it's really quite an amazing thing to use every conversation to expand it beyond that. And now we have cards. So watch out, I've got thousands of cards, so we're going to get the word out fast.
That's great.
Yeah.
Our time's up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
To me, this is so important that we have people telling the story of what's going on. I had an experience in Lima last year where a journalist who does incredibly good investigative work, who's been writing about politics for many years, was assigned to cover COP20, and we had a mutual friend who connected us, and she said, could you come and teach me about what is actually going on here? Because I've been assigned to do this, but I don't know what the best resource is. And so over 3 days, we spent a total of 6 hours where we talked about what's actually going on and what are the ins and outs and the complexities and what's at stake. And so having people actually coming in and telling that story is tremendously important, because NGOs don't have the resources to do it. Their people are overstressed when they're inside. The governments are busy negotiating, and the media don't get to be in every room, and they come in with a huge deficit usually in terms of their knowledge. So this is one of the things that people are able to do to really help create a better flow of information about the reality of all of this. I want to turn things over in a minute to Sarah Beth to talk about what the COP process is. But I want to just start by introducing a very simple idea. That last night, a lot of us were at the place to be, and we heard Dr. James Hansen speak about the climate problem. And I want to put this in perspective. A lot of people say, why is his voice so strong? What makes him different on this from other scientists? Why is his voice so insistent? Why was he the one who in 1988 testified under oath before Congress that the climate was already changing in a dangerous way? And it's taken all this time for us to catch up to that reality and realize it is changing around us. Dr. Hansen started his career as a scientist looking at Venus. And he saw what a runaway greenhouse effect does in the worst case scenario, and understood that a tipping point is not that one phenomenon, like a single glacier, can't be brought back. A tipping point is everything spirals out of control from then on, and there's nothing anyone can do. And so there's a sense of urgency about all of this, and the COP process comes out of a global recognition of that. It goes back to the 1980s, when scientists and economists and governments came together and created a climate treaty and the process that Sarah Beth is going to explain to us momentarily. So I'll just say that Sarah Beth is part of our global strategy team, works for the UN as well, and when I first met her and was told she'll help you explain this, I thought, great, because it's difficult to explain. She did it in 5 minutes, more effectively than most people I've seen try to do it. So with that introduction, Sarah Beth.
And if you have questions for Sarah Beth as she's talking, feel free to write them on stickies and hold them up, and I'll come pick them up.
I heard there was that component, so I'm excited for that, so write a lot on the sticky notes. But hi, my name's Sarah Beth Broccoli. Thanks for that introduction, Joe. And
Get us the mic.
is that better? So I started actually engaging with the Citizens Climate Engagement Network back in February when the Citizens Climate Lobby came to present at my university. And my academic research advisor asked me to present in her place because she wasn't going to be available that day. And that really was my first entry point into what Citizens Climate Lobby is and the narrative that they're trying to produce, which is this very telltale sign of what participatory democracy is supposed to be: citizen engagement and inclusivity in international negotiations where people usually don't have a voice. So appropriately named, Citizens' Voice is helping to bring all of those venues and attributes together. And I think that the team that you saw in the room previously when they all stood up was pretty much all of us working collectively, but then also represents internationally over, I want to say 20,000 volunteers in the United States. More?
Mm-hmm.
21. Someone else has a better number than I do. But the point is that this is the collective engagement process that does interlink a lot of people from different backgrounds. And you think that that's what the UNFCCC and the COP process is supposed to do. So COP is and anyone's not familiar with it, it doesn't stand for the protection of the police state or something else, but it's committee of the parties, and that is representative of the entire process that Joe was just explaining briefly, which began in 1988. And he kind of stole my introduction, but that's fine. I was going to completely plug James Hansen, because this is usually how I start talking about it, because it's my stepping off point. I was born in 1988, and the reason why this is so important to me is because the IPCC was also started in 1988. And at the same time, James Hansen was the first one to produce a report to the Senate of the United States of America talking about global climate change and global warming as a very realistic threat to humanity and ecological systems that keep our realities in place. So coming forward and moving and ratcheting up that entire process from 1988 to where we stand now in almost 2016, you have to wonder how far we came. So I do want to do something similar that Joe did. Whoever has accreditation to the UNFCCC process, can you stand up, please? Anyone who has a NGO badge, a secretariat badge, wow, look at all those people. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm also standing. I work for the Secretariat at the United Nations Division of Sustainable Development. But as you can see, a number of people in this room are not standing, and I think that's very appropriately timed to tell you about what the UNFCCC process is. And what my experience was from the beginning almost to now is that the way that we are able to engage in an international process is very much represented by what you just saw now. So there's very few people that do actually get accreditation to speak on behalf of their own individual narratives for a process that affects people drastically differently across the board. So, and as you saw who's standing in the room that stood up, we're white, we might be older, we're still not representative of the populations that are the most vulnerable to climate change and that have the most drastic effects from greenhouse gases, from carbon pollution, etc. So as we're going through, there have been about 20 years of Committee of the Parties processes developing narratives for adaptation mechanisms for least developed countries, for small island nation states. All of these things are inherent narratives within the COP process. But what we actually can translate that back to our communities is not very telltale. You'll hear a lot of people talk about how the abbreviation system of the United Nations, the ADP, the UNFCCC, the ad hoc working group for the Durban platform, all of these things don't make a lot of sense to people like my mom, my friends, and even trying to talk about those things in a very conversational way, people's eyes glaze over, and as they should. It's not approachable. And that's an inherent difficulty in the process. So I know that you are also writing little sticky notes, and I know that I have 10 minutes, so I do want to get to the part of the participatory democracy in essence. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask me, but I do want to plug one specific tool that I found really helpful in my process from student when I first got to go to a COP process in Copenhagen in 2009, so the big failure of what Copenhagen was supposed to be, but also the achievement of what the Copenhagen Accord was able to do, pushing people to move forward and to make sure that these decisions that international bodies are making get root at the core of people who need to talk about this, so these solutions specifically. So I've been to 4. I was in Warsaw, Peru, which is my favorite country because I was a Peace Corps volunteer there, so it's close to my corazón. And then obviously this year we're all here participating in COP21. So are there any questions from the audience?
Just a clarification.
Sure.
Maybe I misunderstood. Isn't it conference of the parties, not committee of the parties? Is that my misunderstanding?
No, it's conference of the parties, I'm sorry. I get very nervous when I talk to people, so point of clarification,
Okay.
conference of the parties.
Okay, just a
No,
little
you're completely correct. Conference of the parties.
Did you say you were going to share a tool?
Yes, so if you look at this online, this is posted into our Slack feed as well, but this is a timeline narrative of what the UNF process is. And you can go online, it's www.unfccc /timeline, and it gives you a pictorial guideline of everything that has happened since 1988 when James Hansen presented before Congress in the United States and when the IPCC was formed, all the way up to now in Paris. And it's a nice little background. It tells you the decisions that were made going forward, the main players, and the pros and cons of each one. So, highly recommend it. That's where I got my start as a student, and it's where I constantly do research at this level now at the Division for Sustainable Development. I always go back to this tool. Questions?
And it's posted on the Slack feed.
It's also posted in the Slack feed.
In what categories?
Paris team.
So the web address I think is it's unfccc.int
Yes.
/timeline.
Awesome tweeted that.
Cool. So that's why I was at COP this morning as well, and the negotiations, at least for member states, are inherently incredibly boring because the draft text takes a long time to go through. And a really funny attribute, but probably not funny, that I was told to me, a reporter figured out how quickly all member states would have to go through the draft text, which is about between 20 to 30 pages. And they need to move at an incremental pace of 1.5 minutes per line in order to get through the draft text to present to Francois Hollande next Saturday. That's probably not going to happen. Other questions? Clarification?
So when I've been to these conferences before, like when I talked to Bill McKibben at my first conference, he said, well, you come early, but nothing really happens until the last day or the last 2 days, and then they have the extension. You know, how is that embedded kind of in the way they do things to run out of time? I mean, it's very human nature to barely get done in time or not at all. And I'm wondering if you have any insights on that from the inside.
Yeah, also actually my boss, the director for sustainable development for ocean SIDS and climate and transport, said something also very important to me. He said that people really don't want to work until they absolutely have to. And it's like this idea of irreducible complexity, that a problem isn't really a problem until, you know, the night before your term paper is due. You're like, wow, I should have worked on this more, or if I only had more time to figure this out, then it would be perfect. And I think something that's what we all need to appreciate about this process is that a degree of however it is the outcome, it doesn't need to be perfect, but we are out of time. So it's two very specific ideologies that run against each other and conflict, because we actually do need it to be perfect, don't we? We can't have, what is it, 1.5 is the livable amount for most nation states worldwide to be able to deal with the adaptation and mitigation effects of climate change. So we're supposed to mitigate what we can and adapt to what we can't. But what about all those other nation states that can't adapt? What are they supposed to do? And is their time running out because some people can't really figure out what the process should be in a timely manner? But yeah, always at the end there's a massive rush. So.
Do you think having the heads of state come early helps with that? Or I've heard some people be like, why did the heads of state even come early? It's not going to do anything. It would be more effective if they came late, like in next week.
Right at the end. And from a youth standpoint, I've always had that criticism, because it's always the first 2 days there's political pandering. There's this idea that all the important people need to come to kick off the COP, to pass the gavel to the next COP president, to do this massive show of what international political will looks like, but then it steeply drops off. And you'll see heads of states and also like high political actors, prime ministers, come to do the rest of the work that presidents or other important political figures won't be playing that role, but they still lack the steam and the aggression that needs to take place at these international negotiations and levels. So I think that criticism is a very appropriate one, because you think that people would get more done if at the ending that's when political leaders were there. But my question is, if this is one of the most important defining moments of our time, why aren't they there for the full 2 weeks?
So I just wanted to say, did anyone write down questions on sticky notes, or are we just gonna, we could just have an open conversation, but.
I have them all in my hands right now. Virtual sticky notes.
So, George, you had a question. Do you want to ask it now?
Yeah, I can. I wanted to write it down on a sticky note, but I have it here. So, my name is George Snarje. I'm from 1 degree Serbia, from Belgrade, Serbia, and couple of maybe years ago, I learned how CCL is doing stuff with this all direct communication with decision makers and lobbying directly with representatives, and I really thought that such a thing can also be transferred to Europe, and I was really excited about the way of how you are doing things. But when I proposed similar events, like conference in Senate, or what is the name, I don't know exactly, to my European colleagues, they told, okay, look, this is not USA, in Europe things are quite different, and our representatives are not, how to say, so attached to constituencies like Americans. So CCEN is, your goal is to go global, how you will, for example, solve or install network in Europe when people believe that they are disconnected from their representatives. And I know that American democracy is not perfect, but this looks like even worse.
So let me just field that, and then I want to pass it over to someone who can probably comment on the European context. But you know, this is something that I discovered working with local groups in different places. Like, so you're coming from Serbia. We also have volunteers in Nepal, in Bangladesh. We have people who are working to start groups in Panama and Peru. And there are places where access to decision makers is not necessarily going to work in the same way. In some places in Nepal, we've found that our local volunteers are actually the only policy infrastructure that exists.
Yeah.
There is no local government. There is no local official representing the national government. The national government just makes sure that there's nothing bad going on and then kind of stays away until there is. And so while that infrastructure is getting built, there's actually a tremendous role for people to play just developing the civic infrastructure that they need. There are a lot of ways in which these local conversations, like the one we're having now, can actually turn into ongoing engagement. And one of them is to actually pull decision makers into that room. Maybe instead of visiting them, sometimes it's that they come to you and they start to realize there's benefit in that interrelationship. And the fact that some people don't do it that way doesn't mean that it can't be done that way, right? And I think that's why you're here. But if he'll permit me, I wanted to ask Jerome to say just a word or two about the experience that CCL is having in Germany, because some of our groups in Europe have said this, that they're told by political parties, well, we don't really interact with constituents in that way. But I know that CCL Germany has been having a lot of meetings, and it'd be interesting to hear just a few words about, you know, what that feels like.
Yeah, so we're working in Germany now for 2 years. It was started by a volunteer, CCL volunteer, German CCL volunteer was in Washington, and there got to know you guys, and then came back with this idea to do this in Germany. And me and I, him and I, we met at a rally against coal plants. And then he immediately got me and I said, this is what we need. And then since then, now we're 16 now, which is little if you count the numbers compared also, especially to the US. But us 16, we had already, I think now more than 20 meetings with members of the Bundestag. Just now we have been invited to speak before, just Monday, it was very good news, invited to speak before some members of a sustainability group in one of the major parties. So they're really listening to us, and they really, they don't care that we're, just some people, they're already, they're just impressed already that when we tell them, well, no, I'm not working for an NGO, I'm not even a climate scientist. We have lawyers there, we have engineers, we have, I think somebody works in a store, and just when we come there and tell them, no, actually I don't do anything like that, then that's the moment when the attention is there, when they start taking notes. They're like, what, you're not a scientist, you're not getting paid for this, why are you here? Well, we're here because it concerns us, we're citizens, we want to use our democratic powers, if you want, and they say, yeah, great, it's what we need. We need this. We need to see that the population is looking at what we're doing, and we need to see that people like you exist, because otherwise, how can we fight for laws that will, for example, tax carbon? So, yeah.
Thank you, Jerome, and I hope that's, I mean, I know you guys have talked to each other before on call, and maybe Georgie set this whole thing up so that that can happen. We have about 2 more minutes in this Q&A section. I just want to give it back to Sarah Beth and actually ask a question myself, that as someone who sits in the negotiations, right, you sit there and you write reports, on
Yes.
what's happening minute to minute, what the meaning of it is in relation to your division of the UN, and then you also provide insight to all of us. What is it that you feel, being in that position, which I think is sometimes a very isolated position, you can get from having all kinds of people on your team doing things in relation to your efforts, sharing information with you, sharing your information with others? What does that do for you?
I mean, it makes my soul sing, with that very internal mechanism for what that does. But I mean, yeah, working in the secretariat can kind of be a lonely life, right? Because you write reports to people you don't really ever see, and it's supposed to be helping them guide their decision-making process at that level. So where you can't really effectuate change, you're writing a report that might be able to encourage someone else to effectuate change, but it's really a lockstep process. And I'm really new to the UNFCCC. I just started working at the Secretariat in New York City in February, and I'm the lowest in our office. But I'm still there, and I think that that's important to play this idea of showing up into a legal process, into an international mandate that has the ability to make change, but then to also make sure that you're incorporating this idea of what a citizen's voice is. Plug that, citizen's voice. But in its purest form, it's really what you bring to that process as well. So if I'm writing a report, I'll try to inject narratives of civil rights, of human rights, and usually that will make it to the top. But these individual conversations that we have with each other, no matter if you're a scientist, if you're a political activist, if you're an artist, if you are a student, if you are an expert, all of those voices come down into one filtered drop. And that's how we interact with the process. And showing up is incredibly important. So this idea that people get ambivalent to the process, or they don't think that anything's going to happen because they, as an individual person, can't do it. We all know the famous narrative that one person can change the world through small steps, and every single one of our collective actions is a small step. And that's why I stay engaged with the process. That's why I try to be a double agent on both sides for the betterment of what I see to be my world and my future, but also of everyone that's standing in solidarity shoulder to shoulder with me. And I guess I'll leave it on one specific point that I spoke about at Lehigh University last year when I was still a student. This idea that all of these COPs are very important. And in Copenhagen, there was the largest outpouring of civil society that had accreditation to the process and showed up. It was reminiscent of the 1960s. You had massive political protests. You had people who were organized and that were able to not just pressure local leaders, but pressure leaders internationally. That number had significantly decreased in each subsequent COP afterwards. So you're talking about a number of 30,000 participants down to 10 at each subsequent COP. And that's a very telling number. 20,000 voices lost that have accreditation to the process, not counting the people who don't have accreditation, that weren't able to show up and participate. And that's very meaningful. Now at this particular process, I can't remember what the numbers are, but there's something like 3,000 journalists, and media teams, which is more than has been accepted in the past. They're bringing that back up again, but your ability to act and your ability to be engaged is always under fire and is always under question if you let someone take your voice away. So standing here, we all have a collective voice, we should use it, and to know that each one of those little voices is very powerful. Hi, I know where to look. But, yeah, but Naomi Klein last night said, you can't offset your activism, and that's what I want to leave you with. So your activism doesn't need to be rolled.
Sorry, John, carry on, but maybe
okay.
in a minute, thank you.
Oh, sure, no. You can't offset your activism. So whether that's someone in the street making a human chain, or you're actively engaging with a leader that you just had coffee with and you're trying to talk to them about CCL, those movements are important. And I encourage you all to stay engaged and to stay curious.
Thank you so much. I was actually at one of the activists at Copenhagen, and it was a massive and amazing thing. But one of the things about it was that there was huge clashes with the police.
Yes.
I was actually quite frightened about that going into South America in the next one, actually. And I think in some ways that's not the way to do it, and especially here. But actually those clashes with police were the one thing that everyone was talking to me when we got back. Oh, we saw you on the news, we saw this and that, So, actually I didn't agree with Naomi Klein last night. I'm sorry, I thought everything else she said was fantastic. But at the moment, we have to offset our activism. It's all we can do. We have to offset it because nobody can march in Paris and nobody can do anything in Paris. So we have to do small things and clever things, intelligent things and artistic things here. And I think we need to be asking people to do everything all day, not just on the 29th, every day. Let's see everyone out all around the world, and they are marching for us. So in actual fact, I didn't agree with her on that one point.
Well, I think that
But
point.
that's just me, I'm sorry. But
Yeah, I think her point maybe was taken out of context because she wasn't just talking about just the marching part. And I think what I said, maybe I'll clarify it again, is that your activism isn't just being in the streets with signs, isn't just being. Your activism is everything that you're doing right now. So the people that are engaging in writing letters to their editors, people that are writing blogs on The Guardian, people that are showing up and having conversations with leaders that can do something, you're also doing something. That is your activism. And your activism doesn't need to be a human chain, but it's very lucrative when it is. But that human chain doesn't need to be a very concrete idea of what we think it is. We can think a little bit broader about what that human chain might look like.
Well done, Sarah. Thank you. So I wanted to point out that you might have noticed that Sarah has a pin on her lapel and I have one on mine. These are different SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So I happen to have the one on my lapel that's about peace, justice, and strong institutions. And so I just want to say something about that right now, because you know, one of the things that Peter Fikowski said this morning in the Healthy Climate Project launch was that we don't want more serious, right? One of the reasons we want to solve this problem is because this problem is about degradation. It's not just the degradation of the atmosphere and the degradation of the Earth's life support systems. It's the degradation of everything that makes our planet habitable for human civilization. We've built our whole civilization around a climate that's not working anymore. And so peace, justice, and strong institutions is a very big part of the climate solutions business. And one of the strong institutions that's missing is a way for people around the world to engage in global politics. So that's why we're doing this. That's why we're trying to create this convening space for people to actually have a voice, not just that says, we demand you do this, we hope you do this, but that actually plays a role in changing the thinking in the room, whether people can be there or not. So I want to say a few words about our governance strategy. We introduced this document that came from a year of meetings and assessing what allows people to interact constructively and thinking, how do you carry those voices into a process that doesn't really make room for them at the moment. We presented it as something that should be commented on and criticized and altered and received virtually no criticism. From people high up in the UN to people in the NGO community to individual citizens who've never thought about this before, people looked at the structure and said, we love this. This is a really good way to do it. So I'm just going to tell you some of what's in that governance structure because it becomes official today. The Citizens Climate Engagement Network is not an NGO. It's not an organization as such. It's a methodology. It's a way of interacting with people. But it's going to have a structure. So there's an advisory coalition of nonprofit leadership and partners and UN agencies. There's a secretariat for implementation. So the difference between those two is that you can have representation from a number of different types of stakeholders in the UN system and outside the UN system who advise on how things should go and try to make sure that you stay on track and get things right and adopt best practices. But you need people who actually do the work of steering everything. So that's the secretariat that puts into motion this whole thing. And then a global team structure. The global team structure is sort of similar to how Citizens Climate Lobby works, right? You have local groups and networks, and you have people who are tasked with trying to coordinate a little more broadly, and then you have the overall global team. And all of that structure works underneath the secretariat that's trying to guide you to make sure you're getting it right, and this advisory coalition that's giving you ways to bring these ideas into the places where decisions get made. right? So the idea is, if you look at this logo, right, the reason that this is the logo of the Citizens Climate Engagement Network, it's not just a nice thing to look at. Partly it's a reference to Andean spirituality, because the idea for this network actually came up during the COP20 in Lima. But it's also a reference to the circles of access to the UN process, right? There's an inner circle, and there's, you know, a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more than that, and then the media who almost never get to be in the room. And then outside, there's a whole world. And if you look at the top of this logo, you can see that actually the circles are open, and they're open to the whole world. And so the principle of what we're trying to do with this governing structure is to make sure that even though we can't take people from every community in the world and put them in the room where the decision is made, even though we can't reasonably expect for the co-chairs running this process to say, could 7 billion people please vote in a consensus fashion, right? What we can do is we can make sure that the best ideas from those people, and some of those people as well, do get to be there, and do get to be heard, and do get to change the way the thinking goes. So that this global team structure, aligned with the Secretariat for Implementation and then this advisory coalition, is actually a network of people from all levels, from all walks of life, from all backgrounds, from all countries. The toolkit for running local meetings is the way we deploy this strategy. It's a very simple document. It can be easily translated into any language, and it just gives people a sense of how do you run the room, and what do you bring out of that room so that it becomes part of this network. I want to say a few words about some founding partners, because that advisory coalition is very important. It's going to create the core of how we get this to people around the world. And the first UN partner to sign on is UNICEF. UNICEF is in pretty much every country in the world, has 15,000 staff members, and they're working on behalf of the world's children. And their partnerships director, Olaf Scherven, said, you know, this is such an important issue, and without solving this issue, we cannot do good work on behalf of the world's children. And people who are outside of this process need to have a voice. It is not ethical to exclude their voices. So in support of that notion, UNICEF will be represented in the advisory coalition, and from there we will start building in more partners over the next year. Obviously, Citizens Climate Lobby is part of this advisory coalition. So is the International Association for the Advancement of Innovative Approaches to Global Challenges, and the Global Challenges Foundation that's associated with that, the Healthy Climate Project, Cool Planet Minnesota. So we have already a number of nonprofit partners that have signed up. We have a number of other UN venues that are also kind of in talks that could be supporting this. And that's what will help us get everybody's voices to everyone who's making decisions. So I won't go on about that, but between this session and the next that I'm just going to open right now about our work streams, let's do the sticky notes thing, because we want to have a conversation about some of the complexities of this after we talk about a couple of the work streams. And it would be useful, I think, if things that come to your mind in the moment come back in that discussion later. So if you have a chance, just jot down things that are coming to mind, questions, doubts, ideas. And then in the open discussion, we'll first start off with the questions that are on those notes. So in the last year, we had these working sessions where people kind of come together and converse about their values, right? Why am I here? What is it in the world that I want to protect? Why does this matter to me? Not, you know, I love humanity. We all love humanity, right? That's a very big thing, it's very important. But actually something much more personal, you know, something much more local, much more in your experience. And as people talk about those things, what you get is interesting alliances. So you'll have a room full of people where, you know, you've got 3 people who, they just want to talk about carbon pricing, and you've got 3 other people who want to talk about water scarcity, and you've got 3 other people who want to talk about peace and security. And they're all there to meet each other. And it ends up that none of those groups of 3 stay intact. Because it turns out that someone discovers, actually the affinity that I have with you has to do with winter sports. The affinity I have with this other person is about agriculture. I didn't even know I was going to talk about that. And so people get into those groups based on their actual personal affinities, not their issue area or their expertise. And then from those conversations, we can report from the room. So we had a room full of people who thought they were going to talk about, carbon pricing, clean energy, water scarcity, and, the global goal, the long-term goal. But actually, the report from the room includes none of those topics, not as top-line items. They become subtopics because the affinities in the room were for other things, right? Now, out of all of those sessions, what we learned was there are certain common themes, and we should treat those themes as the priorities as we go forward. And what we can do is we can build teams, not in one place, but in a lot of different places, teams of people that work together on that issue regularly, and that help to learn new things, fill in gaps in the overall discussion, do research together, essentially do that grunt work of making everybody smarter that people forget to do, which is what leads to things falling through the cracks. So the first work stream that got started was the carbon pricing work stream. We'll hear a little more about that in a minute, but I want to just run through the list that we now have. We started with the carbon pricing work stream because Citizens Climate Lobby is full of people who think about that a lot and work on that and care about that. We also started an adaptation work stream because it became apparent that unless you can talk about those things in context, in relation to each other, you lose a lot of people in places around the world where adaptation is a priority, a necessity, a life and death kind of necessity. There's a participation work stream because the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in Article 6 mandates that all parties, the governments, motivate real, active public participation in the design of policy and in the implementation of policy. And none of them have ever done it at all. They only do things like get climate change into the curriculum and do some job training for people who want to install solar panels. That's kind of the deployment of solutions, but they don't actually involve the public in the design of the solutions. It's very token where it happens, and in the world's democracies, it's often, well, you can vote, so we're covered. So we have a participation work stream to make sure that the things we're doing in this network actually translate into implementation of Article 6, real public participation in the global process. We have a work stream on the Sustainable Development Goals. We'll hear about that in a minute as well. A work stream on oceans, human health. And then we've now started a long-term goals work stream that the Healthy Climate Project is helping with. And I want to announce today that we have another one. We've been working for some time with an organization called Read and Note. It's a private company that designs software that allows you to interact with electronic text. And we had this idea, wouldn't it be cool if you could take the negotiating text, put it into the Read and Note system, and have people all over the world get in there and comment on it, and create discussion threads, and host meetings inside the document. Their technology facilitates that. We've been trying to figure out the best way to deploy that technology. We don't have the ability to pay for it. And it turns out that there are people in the UN system who don't have the money either. But they might once they see what it can do. And so we've been given access to this technology, at least temporarily, during the COP21. And what we're going to do is, starting tomorrow, we're going to put the most recent negotiating text, the one proposed on Sunday, as well as the Geneva negotiating text, the actual legal document that's still in place, into the Read and Note system, and invite people to join it and to collaborate, to comment on the text. So we're starting a text tracking work stream where people all over the world can actually get in there and try to make the text into an informational resource that people can, inside the negotiations, can benefit from. And if you think about what that means, a lot of times when we've talked about this project, someone says, well, why would a negotiator who knows everything ever look at that? And the reason is they don't know everything. They know almost nothing about what's in the minds of the other negotiators because in a lot of ways this is a big competition. And the way that you have advantage in that competition is by not sharing all of your thinking. And so if it turns out that a number of the negotiating teams start paying attention to this process and they say, wow, I can get insight from hundreds of people and then thousands of people, And it turns out that since last night, when that change was made in the text, people just went in and solved a bunch of problems that were created by the new language. So we're going to read that and bring it into the negotiations the next morning. If you're one of the teams that thinks that you know everything and doesn't need to do that, and you're just going to say your piece and leave the room, you now have a real problem. You will be behind the curve if you don't look at that. And so without having to get permission from anyone, you've now opened up the room. And you've given people access directly to the thinking of the negotiators. That's the hope. So that's what the text tracking workstream will work on.
I have a question about that.
Yeah, sure.
It sounds really exciting, but I see two issues that I don't quite understand. First of all, how is this technology different from other technologies that are out there that allow people to collaborate? And secondly, how would you get over a potential challenge of having the authorities, be so to speak, allow that to happen between negotiators? And
so the first thing is that it's different because it creates an actual, what's that? Okay, I'm sorry. So there were two questions. The first question was, what makes this different from other platforms? And the second is, how do you get around the problem of people authorizing this to happen between negotiators? The first answer is that it's different because this platform allows you to kind of instantly create a new Facebook-style timeline of a discussion thread that's directly linked into an actual electronic book, right? And so the book becomes an anchor for this community. The second is that you can also, in fact, host live video conferences inside the text. You can go in, click on a little post-it, and it opens up a live video conference that's happening right then. So you can set things up and inform the people who are on the scene the morning that they're going to go into the negotiation. The second thing is that you don't need anyone's authorization. The documents are public. It's just that it's very difficult to actually create a community of insight around the document because they publish a Word document or a PDF, and it's not interactive at all. And the people that are going to make decisions about it have absolutely no contact with the outside world. A lot of people who are inside negotiations don't even know who they are on certain teams. It takes time to catch up with that detail. So that's the other thing. It's just about them recognizing that this will make them smarter. So we're about 5 minutes behind. I just want to make that note for our team. And I want to introduce Peter Joseph, who's going to talk about the carbon pricing workstream. The carbon pricing workstream has been working since about April, and he's going to tell you what they've been doing, and it has created a new possibility for how we interact globally with the negotiating process.
Hi everybody, my name is Peter Joseph. I'm a retired emergency physician, San Francisco, California, Citizens Climate Lobby. I've been working on this carbon pricing workstream for several months. And let me just tell you, for background, as an emergency physician, working at a trauma center, I've come to understand very clearly that the more complex the issue, and this is a very complex issue, sometimes the simpler the solutions. The simpler the solutions. And that's how we function in the emergency room, and that's how we're trying to function right here. So we have this big problem. We're at the bottom of the ninth, the bases are loaded, it's a full count, and maybe just one more pitch in this game before it's game over. And as Dr. Hansen pointed out yesterday, we have to get the right solution applied in the right way, and that is to get the world economy, the one thing that will do this for us, we have to get it right, we have to get it straight. And in the current way that the United Nations has been proceeding after what, this is the 21st meeting, there's very little enforcement. We have intentions, promises from many nations to do something that we know won't add up to a solution. And therefore, the solution has to be one that can really solve this problem, and that is to get the money right. And Citizens Climate Lobby is pushing for a carbon fee and dividend with border duties. And it's the border duty that is the enforcement mechanism, not the UN. The UN doesn't have an army. It's the border duty that turns the wheels of the world energy economy around to a clean energy economy. Because if you want to do business with the world's largest economy, the US, we're going to impose a border duty if you don't have a carbon tax. And if just the United States makes a deal with China, makes a deal with the EU, we're going to get somewhere. We are going to get somewhere. So we first started looking at the text, and we found the text inadequate. It's a lot of carbon trading. We know that there's a lot of money to be made in trading. That money does nothing to help the problem. So we're trying to get language in for carbon pricing through a tax, taxation or fee. That doesn't seem to be happening. So we're back to principles, and that's the E3CP. There's going to be some handouts. The three principles are that whatever is agreed to must be effective, it must be efficient, and it must be equitable. And if you actually drill down on that, you come to a carbon tax. Because cap and trade is not effective, cap and trade is not efficient, and cap and trade is not equitable. A carbon tax with the funds recycled back into the economy in any way that the country wishes to. They might build hospitals and schools, they might put money in people's pockets. That meets the E3CP principles. Even the Pope has criticized carbon trading. Hansen has pointed out that you can't solve this problem with individual country promises. Because if Canada or Germany or the United States lowers their consumption of fossil fuels, what does that do to the price? It lowers the price, someone else is going to gobble them up. It's a world problem that requires a global solution, and that global solution can't be imposed by the United Nations. The only entity that can impose a global solution is the global economy itself. That's why the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition announcement on Monday was such a boost. We were so happy to see that. That's the mechanism that's going to work with the UN mechanism coming in at an angle to help the United Nations mechanisms, which are sort of in a straitjacket. They can only do so much. It's going to help these countries actually meet their targets, their individual targets, through a reasonable mechanism, which is carbon pricing itself. And if they follow the principles of efficient, effective, and equitable, they may actually, by 2020, get something effective. So I hope you'll all look at the citizensclimatelobby.org website, and for further explanation, I have written 2 proposals to the MIT Climate Collab contest for a US carbon price that has won the Popular Choice Award 2 years in a row. It's called, if you Google, The Little Engine That Could, and add MIT so you don't get the children's story. The Little Engine That Could plus MIT, both this year and last year, you'll see an explanation of how carbon fee and dividend can work. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Peter. That was incredibly important information. I just want to say a word about the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition that Peter mentioned. We've been talking about this a lot in this group this week, and I think it just bears repeating again and again. A few weeks ago, it was said that carbon pricing was off the table in Paris. And I've been hearing some people at the venue itself say something very interesting about that, which is that you've got to think about what that table is made of. If you think it's made only of the text of the agreement, that may be true. But it's not only made of that. It's made of the agreement and the decisions related to it. It's made of the national plans for climate action, the INDCs. It's made of financing, whatever that is, and we hope it's going to be the re-engineering of the global financial system so that it no longer harms the climate. And fourth, it's made of action platforms for implementation. And when the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition launched, with a similar structure to this, where you've got governments, intergovernmental agencies, businesses, and NGOs all at the same table as peers, making policy, starting Monday, this past Monday. You now have a huge breakthrough in global policy making, and you have an action platform for implementing the Paris Agreement that includes all countries pricing carbon by 2020. So it's a big breakthrough. Things are happening that are actually much more positive than what you're hearing in the general media conversation. And it's important that we understand, what is that table made of? What are we really working on? Okay, so we're now 8 minutes behind. But as long as we all know that, we'll be okay. We're gonna ask Sarah Beth again and the interns team that are all working on the Sustainable Development Goals to tell us a little bit about why do we have a work stream that's focused on linkages between the Sustainable Development Goals and the climate problem. We've got about 10 minutes for that segment. So, Sarah Beth, would you like to come up and take it?
Hello, everyone again. Yeah, please come up here. So, one of the cool parts about being engaged with the Global Strategy Program with Pathway to Paris is that you get to meet really amazing individuals that are the same age as you, working for the same thing, and that are passionate. So I do want to bring them all up here. I know Marcin is currently taking video, so you can't see him, but I'll turn around. And Claire, the Director of Citizens Voice, do you want to come up here? Isatis, come on up. Let's see. And then there are
Technical note, leaving technology on these chairs causes them to slide off the back. But no harm done, it's okay.
Apple drops computers from really tall buildings and they're supposed to withstand both. So let's see if it actually works, because that was my computer, hopefully it was okay. But yeah, so everyone that you see up here has collectively worked on a different part of the project that they found kind of their home within. So I do want to introduce what the SDGs are, but then additionally let the interns talk about what their program is, because I think it's almost a disadvantage to say that someone's an intern when they give blood, sweat, and tears into a program, and they're integral parts of what the entire process is supposed to be. As you heard from Claire before, she's a mastermind behind why Citizens Climate Voice was so important to this project. And the same thing goes with every other one that will do a much better job of introducing themselves than I am. But I'm going to start off with Martin.
Yeah, so my name is Martin Cronin. I'm from Dublin in Ireland, and originally I was working on the Sustainable Development Goals workstream, and I did some outreach projects in Trinity College Dublin, where we were asking people how did climate change affect the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we got quite a good response from the college from that, and then I also did a bit of work on the carbon workstream with John Hampson.
Alright, so I'm Zach Bodwin. I also work with Morgan Wood. We work in the student assembly together for SUNY, and so that's where we started. I work with the SDGs, and so our biggest focus has been partnership, number 17. We feel as if you can't really have effective change unless you have people coming together, like NGOs or governments and the citizens. So we've been going through and trying to figure out how to effectively get different pockets of people and groups to work on them together, and then exploring how they interact with each other, because they're all pretty inclusive.
Where are you from?
New York State, in the States.
No, the only thing is that we have a really unique niche where we're in a system of 64 campuses, and so we've had a lot of different people being able to talk and understand what the SDGs are, and we're hoping to talk to other systems. We reached out to California, and so we're hoping to start like a butterfly effect and have other people also understanding SDGs, because it's all encompassing, from eradicating poverty to ending climate change. It all plays into each other, so I think that's a really unique way that SDGs can be approached.
I just want to say it's really also unique because SUNY we have SUNY Global, and so it's everywhere. They have government, partnerships and stuff, and we have professors who have gone everywhere. And so by SUNY aligning with that, we are reaching out to a lot of different groups, a lot of different places, and like Mexico, we have someone going to Mexico to do sustainable forestry, part of SDG 15. So it's like.
And I'm going to rep the two that are not here because there are two interns that are also currently in the COP delegation with Moravian College, and those two students were able to gain accreditation through an institution outside of CCL, but they were also individually working on the framework and the voice behind SDGs at their university, and they put on a number of political engagements that talk to students about what's your SDG, what are the interlinkages between something like Goal 6, which is water and sanitation, and Goal 5, which is the gender goal, and what that might mean for climate change impacts for women specifically abroad. So there's a number of interlinkages that we plug here at the United Nations, because I'm sure that you heard the criticism from the economists saying that the stupid development agenda is something that's not necessarily obtainable or relatable to, but when you transition from something where the MDGs only had 8 goals, Millennial Development Goals, that ended in 2015, and now we're transitioning to the next Save the World platform that the UN is putting forward. For the next 15 years, the Sustainable Development Goals, they are now at an aggregation of 17 goals with 169 individual indicators. So that's a lot of disaggregated data that the UN is transitioning towards, but that's something that each one of these people individually has worked on in some capacity.
My name is Isati Cintrón. I'm from Puerto Rico. I'm currently in New Jersey studying my PhD in atmospheric chemistry, so I'm kind of like a scientist, but I'm also working with community empowerment. So I started working with the SDGs, and the way that I use them is to bring people, like common people, to the room to talk about climate change and how this relates to their daily life and their priorities, because people all over Latin America and Caribbean have other priorities that, yes, climate change intersects with them, but sometimes they are worried about what am I going to put in the table for my kids, and it's like a tool to get them together. But I'm also working with creating partnerships with organizations to come and participate of the CCEN, so the Citizens Climate Engagement Network, so to get that voice of the Latino people across the whole Central, South, and Caribbean into this program. Because as we were talking about in Citizens Voice today, Indigenous people want to be part of the table, as other people should be too. And like, we cannot have a table of 7 billion people, but we can try to give them more access to the process. So I'm working with getting that, like my community, into the process.
And hi, my name is Clara Shea, and I'm originally from Minnesota. Just graduated from Boston University, and I now live in DC. And I've just been running Citizens Voice, so I'll leave it at that.
Just running Citizens Voice. So I think that, like, really a round of applause for everyone that's on here. Like I said before, it's like when you are working in a team objective, it's really important to be surrounded by really smart people. And I think that collectively we form a team in so much as it's not necessarily one person directing the other, but how we all are able to adapt to each other and do our own projects while simultaneously making sure that this one joint effort for CCEN is one that is meaningful from our standpoint as youth, and then talking intergenerationally for what this entire project is, because if you look around the room, there's a huge disparity of ages, but at least at the Sustainable Development Goals in their core, this is something that's very important. It's this intergenerational quality that really makes a agenda achievable when people from different walks of life work together and different ages. So if I can leave you with the Sustainable Development Agenda of what it's supposed to be, it's disaggregated, it's supposed to be more inclusive, and it wasn't just 4 white men in the UN making a decision in the basement about the Millennial Development Goals, and then someone walking down the hallway saying, oh, you should include environment. And he's like, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And then that was the Millennial Development Agenda. This was, the Sustainable Development Goals were painstakingly decided, and I remember being in the room over the weekend when all member states finally decided to adopt the agenda in September. And it's really because a number of collective people were pushing for their own individual goals in the same way you see these people up here pushing for projects that are close to their communities. So.
Could we hear your ages?
Oh boy.
I'm 22.
25. 27.
19.
22.
24. Bravo.
So go back to Joe. So thank you so much.
So the world is in good hands. Young people doing things think, to make a better future. I want to say something about that point that Sarah Beth mentioned, that there's a critique from some people that the Sustainable Development Goals are too complex, there are too many targets, it's trying to do everything at once. But consider that the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, which is the global development agenda through the United Nations for all countries from 2015 to 2030, applies to all people in all countries. So the idea that we wouldn't all together try to get everything right is kind of strange. And I think that, that's the kind of optimistic thinking that has brought us all here together. And I think it's a lot more logical. It's a lot more logical when you think about what the United Nations is supposed to be, which is a way to make sure that there's peaceful, inclusive prosperity around the world, not global conflict at all times, that in its 70th General Assembly, 70 years, the formal agenda was adopted to try to get everything right. Officially, for the first time, all of the nations of the world decided, let's work together to get everything right from now on. And so that's a really, I think, important moment, and it's an important step forward, and it's a turning point. And I'm going to ask Jerome to come up and tell us a little bit about oceans, because we have an oceans work stream, and it's important to think about, you might live on land, there's a lot going on under the water, and what does that actually mean in relation to the way that we live, in relation to getting this whole thing right. So, Jerome?
Okay, so who was surprised when suddenly Joe comes out with ocean here, the climate change thing? Hands up. I see there are some, okay, less than I thought. But, I think it's the same like the negotiators not long ago, or maybe still some are feeling that, what does this have to do with our topic, climate change? And this is really the first time this COP, the oceans are really part of the big pictures, that there is a spotlight there, which is sad, but just follows a long trend. It's the same with science and politics. I don't know about US, but in Germany, for example, environmental laws on the Earth Sea, on the North Sea, in the Baltic Sea, they're 20 years behind compared to the terrestrial environmental laws. And it's always the same. It's just in science, in policy making, it's always forgotten somehow, and which is, I saw a scientist today saying this is because it's far away. Not everybody lives on the coast. You can't really see inside. We can only scuba dive now for 50 years. So it's far away in our mind, but actually it influences us a lot. Just talking of climate change, when you hear that half of the world's, some scientists say more, half of the world oxygen comes out of the sea, and that 60% of CO2 that we produce is not going to plants or to the atmosphere. 60% of that goes into the sea, so it takes up a lot of what we do wrong, and even more, it takes up the heat, the extra heat that is generated so far mostly has gone into the oceans. So without the oceans, there would have been much more heat here. We couldn't even live anyways, but people tend to forget that or don't even know it. So this shows that oceans are in fact very, very important part of the system, of the climate system itself. So we have to take this much more into account. Also because, not just because of that, because of that we get our oxygens from there, but also small island states are a real threat to disappear. Depending on if we have outcome or not, then in 20 years a lot of these states will not exist anymore. I have there statement from one of the major coral reef scientist association, where all of the scientists signed that if we don't do something now, in 20 years coral reefs are a thing of the past. We'll not be able to see them anymore. And it's not just because it's so nice to scuba dive there. 400 million fishers live just on coral reef alone. 1.2 billion people are directly dependent, either because their father's a fisherman, because they're selfish, or because the reef protects them from storm, are directly dependent their survival on the reefs. Also the fisheries are under threat. by itself already, that we fish too much, but also because of climate change, everything changes. So also the fish stocks. Then there's ocean acidification, that is something that happens. It's not the warming itself. It's not really the climate warming. But it all comes also from the CO2 that goes into the water, makes it more acidic, and makes it much harder for a long range of organisms to live. So it's really time that we put a spotlight to the oceans, and that's why I'm glad that tomorrow is also the Ocean Day at the COP, where we can learn a lot about what is happening there. But we will not just hear what is so bad about that, but surely also that a lot of the solutions lie in the ocean also, because it's such an integral part of our climate system, and what happens with the heat, what happens with other negative ecological influences are buffered by the ocean. That's why we can also use the ocean to make it better. So I want to bring a glimmer of hope here. I want to make you understand how important it is, but also how important it is that we know what happens there, but also how important it is that we turn there for solutions, because there is a lot to do there. I could go on now, but you will see probably tomorrow a lot of this there. That's the one thing, is inform yourself about that. The other thing is, what for me is one of the most important things, and this is why I think I became a marine biologist, is because I love the ocean. I love to see it, I love to be inside it, and I love to share my love for it. So do the same. Go diving, go boating, go fishing, go on the beach, and bring other people and explain them. That will be, I think, the biggest thing you could do for the oceans. Thank you.
One second. We're going to do one more thing before questions. And then, so thank you, John. But we're going to have the people who've spoken be able to answer questions. If you're jotting down your ideas and concerns on stickies, we'll collect those in a minute. But first I want to just introduce, for those of you who didn't see this morning's presentation, Peter Kukowski, to talk about the Healthy Climate Project and the Healthy Climate Workstream, and why this is part of this kind of project of citizen-led monitoring and policy development that we're doing.
Great, thank you. So the whole climate process really has a goal. And the first question you ask is, what is the goal? And I was delighted to see that the process now has a work stream for long-term goal. I have to be honest and say I have not looked into what they're saying at this point. We did a workshop here just previous to this on the Unhealthy Climate Project to say, what if we set a goal for the climate for having a healthy climate? And I don't know, there's not a lot to say other than what it is to invite you as people participating to ask yourself, well, what if the goal was a healthy climate? What if we wanted to get back a healthy climate for our children to live in? And it turned out that we can do that. And the first thing we need to do is tell the people who are actively making policy that the goal we want them to work for is a healthy climate. Because indeed, the policy that you need for a healthy climate is going to be different than the policy you need for a not very good climate. And the direction we're heading right now is a not very good climate. A lot of people are trying to stabilize the climate, sort of stabilize it into a not very good climate, which may not be what we really want. So our opportunity is to communicate to people, all the people engaged in climate work with the UN, to look at a goal that they really want, could get passionate about, which is a healthy climate. And that's all I think I have to say. Joe, anything else? Can you tell me anything about, tell us all about what's in the stream at this point?
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of contextualize a little bit. Why are we working with the Healthy Climate Project on this work stream? The long-term goal is a highly controversial issue in the negotiations. Some people think that if we establish this goal, we will save all life on Earth, and if we establish a different goal, we're all dead. And so it gets people very hot under the collar, it gets people into very heated arguments, and a lot of it is rhetorical. And what Peter and the Healthy Climate Project are working on is how people think about the long-term goal. Is it something that where we're striving for actual success? Or is it something where we're striving for something that's somewhere on the way to success but might include so much chaos that we actually can't keep a lid on things? And so the long-term goal could be a 2 degrees Celsius global temperature rise, or 1.5 degrees temperature rise, or 350 parts per million, or 280 parts per million, right? It could be full decarbonization by 2050, negative emissions by 2100. These are all different options. But what the Healthy Climate Project is doing is trying to put all those things in perspective. Those are all stops on the way to success. Right?
Yeah. And so, just for people listening, the goal that we're talking about is restoring the ice caps. It's something that's meaningful. To do that means that we've ended sea level rise and we've restored normal weather conditions. And that's pretty much what we want for a healthy climate. And that's not something that you necessarily get with any degree of CO2 or decarbonization or any other measure. Okay, good.
Thank you, Peter.
Good, thank you.
So, we have now about 15 minutes for an open discussion on all of these workstream subjects. What we're going to try to do is borrow the insights that come from the questions you're asking on these stickies to try to motivate that conversation, but it's an open discussion. So it's not just what's on the stickies or what I say. What we're going to try to do is have a kind of Q&A for those who've spoken about these different work streams, Q&A in general, and anyone can stand up and say, you know, I have the answer to that. But we want to see if we can actually figure out what it is that we're trying to do in this room on specific areas of affinity. So let's just start out by collecting those questions. Do we have any?
I have two.
Two over there.
We got one specifically about oceans, one about CCEN in general.
Why don't we start with CCEN,
In general.
and then we can go to the oceans one, and Jerome can come back and answer that.
So, why not have the UNFCCC or well-known NGO do the read and note instead of a small new organization that will have to fight very hard to be heard amongst a plethora of environmental projects, organizations, NGOs, all vying for the same audience?
So why not have an already established sort of big global NGO or UN agency or something do the read and note thing? Well, the reason is because, well, let's just say, why does Citizens Climate Lobby exist? It exists because there's a massive gap in the way that we make policy about climate, which is that no one is actually sitting down and talking to people who don't want to do it. What people do is they gather somewhere else, call people names, get really upset, get everyone else upset, and there's no one making those connections. So when the founder of CCL, Marshall Saunders, went to big NGOs and said, listen, there's a way to do this. I've worked with an organization that does this for years, that's raised billions of dollars for poverty reduction, hunger relief, and fighting disease around the world through this way of doing citizen engagement. Every single one of them said, we don't do that. That's not our mission. We have no resources for that. And so he said, well, I guess I have to do it. So he started up this organization with 29 people in one local chapter in 2007, and in 2015 there are over 21,000 members that are doing that work now. It takes time, it takes effort, but you know, a number of people have been saying throughout the last year, and I think after the attacks that happened here in Paris, it became an even more important insight that what we're trying to do is hard, and that's why we're doing it. And so you ask people to do something that's outside their comfort zone or that's outside their mission, and they say no, you can either just let it go or you could do it. So no one else is doing it, that's why we're doing it. The others can kind of get involved, it's a completely open thing.
How tied in is your work to the work of Rockstrom, of you, Stefan, etc., planetary boundaries with its balance, including something overview, not affecting one area to, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, it's just, I'm wondering how you tie in with the work of Rockstrong, Rockstrong and Stefan, the planetary boundaries, because it always strikes me as a really good way of looking at things, so that we're not sort of trying to get one area and actually putting other areas into great disbalance or unbalance. And I just thought, that's a really good way to look at life. It's got the ocean, acidification in there, but it's got all the other things as well. And it's a developing piece of work,
So the issue of planetary boundaries is one where, there are a lot of ways to address that question. It's a very important concept, and there's a lot of really great work that's been done on it. And some people's approach to the question of planetary boundaries is that we should all stop traveling, we should all stop eating, we should all stop doing things that we have to do to connect to each other as a global society. Other people's approach is we should just do everything intelligently, make sure we live within our limits. That countries should try to have some kind of balance as to how resource intensive every country is per capita. The thing that I think our approach is going towards is, there's no one approach to the question of planetary boundaries that's the exact right approach, but what we can do is we can aim for the smartest possible outcome. And the smartest possible outcome would be that we don't overstress the planet. And if the way that we get there is by developing the most efficient technologies, then that's what we should be doing. And if the way that we get there is by being more responsible about our use of resources, that's what we should be doing. When we know that excess emissions of heat-trapping gases ruin the Earth's life support systems, we have to stop doing those things. I think that's our approach, but what we're doing as a network is to try to learn from people's experience, what can they do, what are they doing, and how do we share that information so that others can keep up with the leaders, the ones who are doing it best. I think it's to try to fill in that gap where there needs to be more momentum, more sharing, more insight. And
can I add something to that?
Sure.
What I want to add is that my ER doc analogy, again, is that this problem of climate change can very easily become overwhelming. And I doubt that there's a person in this room who doesn't feel overwhelmed by this challenge. And therefore, we wish we could call in Superman. Superman is something of our childhood comical fantasies. But there is a Superman still available to us, and that is the power of money. And right now, the money is sick. The money is ill. The money system, which runs everything outside of nature in the human world, has become corrupt. It's the market failure of the externalization of the damages caused by these artificially cheap fossil fuels. And if we start sending the right money signals to everybody, even people who don't care about climate change or even know that it's happening, they will get that signal, because everybody touches money. Almost everybody touches money. If you're a tribe in the jungle in the Amazon, maybe you don't touch money very much, but everybody else does. And so that's the tweak. It's the little engine that could. It's the little tweak in the economy that, like in the climate system, a small forcing over time, that's how climate change used to take place. A small forcing over time has an enormous impact on the climate. And a small tweak in the money system will have an enormous impact in human behavior. And I think that that will go a long way to solving the problem. And it makes the problem much less daunting, because we don't have to start talking about giving up the things we want to do. Those things will fall into place as the money gets healthier. That's the concept.
Okay, continue. I have here very good questions concerning the oceans. Do we need a much higher target for MPAs, or can we address oceans outside of these two, I think? MPAs, so MPAs, it's somebody who knows ocean
That's my
resources.
question. I'm a forester, but I'm very aware.
So yeah, you have the same. It's a so MPA is marine protected area. We have the same in the forest protected area.
Yeah.
The concept, if you want, comes again came from the protected areas on land that was put into use on water. So there's areas that you designate, and you say inside these areas there is a higher protection than outside. You do that through regulating human activities inside. Typically, it is limiting or banning fishing inside, but it can also be other things, and it can be a mixture of. So, but in theory, in short, it's just an area, and you say there you can do fishing, you can do something else.
Traffic or oil tankers.
You can, yeah, you can
Canada,
also.
some oil tankers may not go through these
That can be
areas,
also
so
something, yeah.
oil spills.
But there is, for example, in the Philippines, there is, I know because I work there, there's some small MPAs which are just because nothing else is happening here, but then the locals say no fishing there. That is a very classical MPA. So yeah, we need more MPAs. Right now, I think of the whole world, we have less than 2% of the water surface protected, and this is very biased towards certain ecosystems. Obviously, coral reefs more, which is good because coral reefs are very vulnerable because of ocean acidification, and excess heating can also kill a coral reef very fast. But there is a lot of ecosystems which are not protected. For example, deep sea MPAs, there is very little, and we should try to get all of the ecosystems. And then also scientists who really study MPAs, they say, well, if we could decide, then we would like to have 30% of the world oceans protected, which is really a lot. Even if you say it's not a 30% complete ban, but regulated inside is still a lot. But in general, politicians are up to. There is, I think, in the SDGs. The SDG, this guy, was it 10% the goal in the SDGs? Because there is a marine protected area goal there. I think it's 10, which is very good already. But that should be very well. This would be very good already. You should just look that it's not just one ecosystem or not just on one continent, but repartition well. Look where is the most valuable ecosystem, the most healthy. Maybe we protect those more than half broken already, and then also let's try to have coastal ecosystems, deep sea, open high seas. This is really very important because after all, even if you don't address directly the climate change to an MPA, you wanna always increase the resilience of an ecosystem to climate change, and increasing resilience nowadays because every ecosystem is affected by human activities. So the best way to how to increase the resilience is to take away as much as possible these anthropogenic effects, because those are the worst. It's like I heard a coral reef scientist today. I think coral reefs can survive climate change, but not like now. Not with pollution, overfishing, destructive fishing methods, destructive tourism, runoff from land, of fertilizing, too much fertilizing. So there will be, as if somebody does have diabetes, tuberculosis, cancer all at once, you will die if you have that. But if you have just cancer with modern medicine, you probably will survive, and that's the same. So we should also, so these MPAs are very good at taking the way to take away stressors and make nature do its way of being able to grow their own defenses and be strong again.
I have a question about ocean acidification.
Yeah.
The ocean wants to be where? It's about 8.4. Where is it now, and where is it going? When?
I think it's at 8.1. It was pre-industrial, and I think now we're already at 8.0, almost 7.9, and it already starts. There is one fishery already which is affected. That's Northeast Pacific oyster fisheries, or
northwest.
Northeast
Pacific. It's northwest of the coast of Washington.
But the Pacific is the East Pacific is
Ocean.
the west coast. Yeah. So we have this, but this will happen more. We still don't know exactly where. I saw yesterday a presentation about a group of scientists that does an analysis, how it will affect certain organisms, and he also says there's a lot of unknown, but it will definitely be bad. Not just for fishing, but also for many other things.
May I make an analogy, something that I use in my talks? The change in the pH in the ocean that's due very quickly is about 0.4 pH units, or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, but a little less now, but we're going there.
Okay. Your pH is 7.40 right now. If you come to the emergency room with a pH of 7.0, that's 0.4 units more acidic, you are sick. You need resuscitation, you're going to the intensive care unit because you have been poisoned, you have lost half your blood volume from trauma, you're in diabetic ketoacidosis, you are very, very sick. That is a very sick metabolic acidosis. And we're doing that to the oceans that cover 2/3 of the surface of the planet, and rapidly. And it seems to me that the civilization that knows how to engineer its own DNA, land a school bus on the surface of Mars perfectly, develop a planetary nervous system, part of which I'm holding in my hand, knows better than to cause a metabolic acidosis to the oceans from which we came. That is not the sign of an intelligent civilization. And so part of what we're doing now is to prove whether the kind of intelligence humans possess actually has survival advantage. And the direction we're going is, that question is going to be answered in the negative.
I think the number that I've seen, like at 450 parts per million in atmosphere, it's over. And again, it depends which part of the ocean. Colder oceans respond more than the warmer oceans. That's a relatively number which I've seen quite a bit.
So this is an IQ test for us here.
Very good analogy.
Yeah, very good.
Number is there.
It's an excellent analogy. And so we have, thank you, Jerome. We've had a couple of extra questions about carbon pricing in the international context, but we also had a question about gender. And we really only have time for one question right now before we move on to the next thing. So, Claire, do you want to read that question?
What about gender?
Gender, yeah.
Do you consider the gender perspective in your job?
Oh, in my job. So I was going to open it up and have people share their thoughts, but I do consider it. I had the privilege of.
The question is about the organization.
Yeah. Well, so as an organization, we have the desire for everyone to have the most political empowerment and the most access as possible, without any determination as to who that would be. So we do definitely consider that. In terms of the impact that comes from climate or from political decision making that may be different because of the gender of people impacted, it's also something that we're very sensitive to, and think that people should be able to express that experience and not be kind of ignored under the assumption that all things are equal and everybody's equal. But what I was going to say was that there are two things that I've experienced that say to me that everyone everywhere should be a lot smarter about this issue. One is that I used to teach humanities, and I was able to teach Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Woman, where she makes a very particular argument, which was that in 18th century Britain, which is a very talkative and open society for its time, it was still an aristocratic society where women did not have full legal rights in almost every way that we now have started to take for granted in open democracies. And the argument she made was that because of that inequality, the whole society was in prison. Everyone, the most powerful people, were living within this tremendous amount of limitation where everything was a charade. Because it was the charade that everybody is protected, that everybody is empowered, that everybody has dignity, when in fact, everybody is being treated as if they don't deserve to live in a world where people are equal, which is a better world. And so she kind of calls on the societies of the world, more or less democratic regardless, to advance that kind of equal treatment. And education is one of the main priorities. And what we find often in this climate discussion is that education is the huge deficit. And in many parts of the world where conflict arises, or where there are very severe gender imbalances, or where people are actually experiencing real day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute persecution based on nothing other than their gender, one of the reasons for that is that there is not enough education in general. There's not enough underlying education of the whole society to empower people to make that better world. So that's exactly what we're trying to correct. The other experience I had that I want to just specifically say is that when we first announced the governance strategy for the Citizens Climate Engagement Network, it was in the Minneapolis 2015 conference on October 25th and 26th. And what was so special to me about that was that, except for me and one other person, the core planning team were all women. And they were all very strong women, women who know exactly what they need to do at the right time to create this good outcome. And the reason I thought that was interesting was that we were talking about these kind of issues of inclusion, issues of access. And what happened there was a very open discussion where people were able to share views from many different perspectives. And for me, it was just a privilege to be in that environment. So I think that's something that we're always thinking about. We have in the agenda 5 minutes for a moderated discussion among the room about what are the things we're focusing on here today. So what are some of the subjects that have come up as key points that we in this room are focusing on? And I don't think 5 minutes is enough time, but we actually don't quite have 5 minutes either because we're a little over. But maybe could people just kind of stand up and say just as quickly as possible, 1 word, 2 words, the theme that they think is really standing out to them. And we'll get a few of those and just document them. So anyone, something that you think is really a focus of today in your mind? Peter?
Well, participating for what, to get what we want.
Okay, participating for what we want.
Could we add to
Yeah.
fair participation?
Fair participation. Okay.
Global expansion.
Global expansion. Expansion of
The network.
Okay.
The web of concerned and frantic people.
Global expansion of the web of concerned and frantic people. So ecological agriculture.
Okay.
So ecological agriculture, ecologically sound agriculture.
Access through affinity.
Access through affinity. I like that. Yes.
Using money to turn the levers.
Using money to turn the lever.
Website images.
Does that also mean making money do good?
Yeah, but it's more like using the economy to incentivize, just to kind of nudge people to do the right thing and not do the wrong thing, and they don't even know it.
Right.
I see.
Is that the same as, maybe I was thinking alternative financing mechanisms that you talked about, or is that the same?
It overlaps.
I think alternative financing mechanisms is a different line, just in case. And then, so let's take one more.
Listening more closely.
All right, so while Claire's writing, listening more closely, I'm going to read off what's there, and when I finish reading, I just want to see from maybe a raising of hands, who thinks this is a good list. Participating for what we want, fair participation, global expansion of the web of concerned and frantic people, ecologically sound agriculture, access through affinity, using money to turn the levers, using economic incentives, alternative financing mechanisms, and listening more closely. Does that sound like a good representation of what we've been talking about today?
Ocean health.
And ocean health, okay. Ocean's got a lot of time, so that's good.
Building relationships.
Okay, so if we like this list as it is, everything I read plus ocean health and building relationships, let's just applaud. If not, if the room is silent, then we will spend the next 2 hours getting it right. All right, so thank you for indulging us all this time. I want to say a couple of things about some of the people who are signing up to support this. Someone who's not here today because he's actually doing another event inside the venue is Miroslav Polzer, who's the Secretary General of IAAI, the International Association for the Advancement of Innovative Approaches to Global Challenges, and the founder of the Global Challenges Foundation. And Miroslav's thinking about what people like us can do is that when you see that the global system is not quite working like a well-oiled machine, not helping people as much as it could, or there are a lot of political